How many more times are you going to tell yourself that tomorrow everything starts, knowing full well that this tomorrow hasn't shown up in years? I want you to sit with that question for a second before we go on, because I didn't ask it to make you feel bad. I asked it because you probably already know the answer and you've been avoiding it for a while. There's a very specific feeling I want to describe to you, because I suspect you recognize it better than you'd like to admit. That quiet discomfort that shows up when you're doing everything right on the outside, keeping your schedule, showing up for family, meeting everyone's expectations, and yet, inside, you feel like you're living a life you didn't even write yourself. I'm not talking about a one-off problem that a weekend of rest can fix. I'm talking about something deeper, something that builds up quietly over months, even years, until it becomes a kind of constant background noise we'd rather ignore than confront. I'm going to be direct with you from the start, because this video isn't meant to stroke your ego or hand you pretty lines you'll forget 2 minutes after closing the app. It's meant to make you uncomfortable enough to act, and also to give you a concrete tool, simple, almost absurdly simple, that can start changing the direction of your life tonight. But before we get there, we need to talk about why we stay in exactly the same place for so long, even when part of us knows with total clarity that something has to change. The first uncomfortable truth is this: inaction is also a decision. There's no such thing as staying neutral toward your own life. When you say tomorrow will start, when you say it's not the right time yet, when you say I need to wait until I feel more ready, what you're actually deciding, with the exact same force as if you announced it out loud with full conviction, is to stay exactly where you are. The human brain has a powerful tendency to prefer the familiar, even when the familiar makes us deeply unhappy, because the unknown triggers a primitive fear far more intense than accumulated dissatisfaction. That's why we don't change when we should. We change when the pain of staying the same finally outweighs the fear of moving. Here, I want to introduce something that's going to sound harsh, but that you need to hear without filters. Most of the excuses we use to avoid changing aren't lies we tell other people. They're lies we tell ourselves, and those are the most dangerous kind, because we repeat them with such conviction that we end up believing them completely. It's not that you don't have time, it's that you haven't decided to make it a priority. It's not that it isn't the right moment, it's that you're afraid of what it would mean to try and fail, or worse, to try and discover it doesn't make you as happy as you imagined. Fyodor Dostoevsky once wrote something that sums this up with brutal precision. Man sometimes prefers the comfort of his own lies to the discomfort of a truth that demands action. And that line, even though it comes from a distant era, describes exactly what happens inside your head every night when you decide to put things off one more time. I want you to think now about something you've probably never framed in these exact words. Right now, in this very moment, you are the author of the story you're living, even if it doesn't feel that way. The difference between people who transform their lives and those who stay trapped for decades isn't intelligence or talent or even the luck that gets brought up so often in shallow conversations. The difference is that some people decide to pick up the pen that writes their own story, while others resign themselves to being a side character in a script written by fear, by routine, or by other people's expectations. Think of any filmmaker you admire, someone capable of building an entire universe from scratch, without asking permission, without waiting for unanimous approval before taking the risk. Quentin Tarantino didn't wait for anyone's green light to start creating his own cinematic style. Risky, different, uncomfortable for many people at the time. He simply started building his version of the world, even knowing not everyone would like it. And that same logic applies directly to your life. No one is going to hand you an official permit to start living on your own terms. That permit only exists if you decide to grant it to yourself. Now, before you think this is just about fleeting motivation, I want to take you somewhere even more uncomfortable: brutal honesty with yourself. Nietzsche insisted on an idea that deeply unsettles anyone hearing it for the first time. Becoming who you truly are first requires honestly tearing down every comfortable mask you've built to survive without facing your own mistakes. I'm not talking about self-pity dressed up as reflection or repeating pretty phrases about self-love while avoiding a real look at what you're doing wrong. I'm talking about sitting down, literally, in front of yourself, with no distraction whatsoever, and asking with total rawness, what part of my current situation is entirely my own responsibility? And this is where I want to share with you the concrete method, that simple tool I mentioned at the start. You don't need a perfect life plan mapped out down to the last detail, or some spiritual epiphany that spontaneously arrives while you're doing something else. You need something far more accessible: silence, a notebook, a pen, and the willingness to write with zero internal censorship. Nighttime works especially well for this exercise, not for any mystical reason, but because during the day we're constantly distracted by outside stimuli that keep us from clearly hearing what we actually think about our own existence. When the outside noise disappears, what's left is simply your mind, and that's where, in that uncomfortable silence, the real work happens. The exercise works like this. You sit down completely alone, with no screen nearby, no music playing to distract you from what you're feeling, and you start writing down 3 fundamental questions. The first: what am I currently doing wrong that I've refused to admit until now? This isn't about vague generalities like, I should be more disciplined. It's about naming, with surgical precision, every habit, every relationship, every behavior pattern you know perfectly well is hurting you, even though you'd rather avoid it in your everyday thoughts. The second question: what do I need to leave behind for good in order to move forward? This is where many people discover that their stagnation doesn't come only from a lack of action, but from an inability to let go of something that no longer belongs to them, whether that's a relationship that drains more than it gives, an identity built on old fears, or a routine that once made sense but today only keeps them stuck in repetition. And the third question, perhaps the most important of all: what concrete, specific, achievable action can I take tomorrow? I'm not talking about huge decisions that sound impressive but never get carried out because they're intimidating from the very first moment. I'm talking about something small, tangible, almost ridiculously simple compared to the size of the problem you're facing. Sending that message you've been putting off, getting up 15 minutes earlier, finishing a pending conversation that's gone unresolved for too long. Real transformation never happens in one magical instant. It happens through tiny decisions repeated consistently until one day, without even noticing exactly when, you realize you've already become a completely different person from the one who started this process. I want to pause here to clarify something crucial that a lot of people misread when they hear this kind of message. Fear isn't going to disappear before you act. This is one of the most widespread lies about personal change. The idea that you first need to feel completely secure, completely ready, completely free of doubt, and only then will you be able to take the first step. Neurological reality works exactly the other way around. Fear decreases after you act, not before. Every time you face something uncomfortable, even with shaking legs and a mind full of doubt, you teach your own nervous system that you can survive that discomfort. And the next time that same action feels a little less terrifying, waiting to feel brave before moving is simply waiting for something that will never arrive on its own. There's something else I need to warn you about before continuing, something most personal development content prefers to skip because it's less commercially appealing. The process of becoming the author of your own life is going to include loneliness. Not loneliness as permanent isolation, but that temporary, uncomfortable kind of loneliness that shows up when you start making different decisions than the people around you have been making until now. When you decide to stop justifying destructive habits, some people in your current circle are going to feel uncomfortable with your change because your transformation, without you even aiming for it, exposes the excuses they're still holding on to themselves. That loneliness, even though it hurts at first, tends to be exactly the space you need to get to know yourself at a depth that constant company rarely allows. Now, I want to tell you something counterintuitive but absolutely true. You don't need to solve your entire life in one night of deep reflection. That's another common mistake that paralyzes a lot of people before they even start. The belief that change has to be total, immediate, and perfect on the first try, or else it isn't worth starting at all. That all-or-nothing mindset is, ironically, just another, more sophisticated form of procrastination dressed up as high personal standards. Real transformation looks a lot more like building a wall brick by brick than flipping a switch and waking up as a completely different person. A single concrete decision, made honestly today, is worth infinitely more than a perfect plan imagined for months without ever executing anything at all. I want to bring back the film metaphor because I think it helps explain something essential about this process. Think of any well-built story, any movie that has truly left a mark on you. No memorable protagonist goes through their story without obstacles, without doubts, without genuine moments of darkness where everything seems like it could fall apart. What makes a protagonist memorable isn't the absence of difficulty, it's the constant decision to keep moving forward despite it. Now, here's the nuance I want you to understand with total clarity. You can choose to be that protagonist within your own story, or you can keep being a side character in a script someone else is writing for you, whether that's your family, inherited fears, the comfortable routine that traps you, or simply the inertia of keeping on doing the same thing because change demands an effort you'd rather avoid. And I want to be especially careful about something at this point, because I don't want you walking away from this thinking you need to dramatically break away from everything around you in order to finally start truly living. That's not what this is about. It's about identifying, honestly and without unnecessary drama, which concrete elements of your current life are actually aligned with who you really want to be, and which ones are simply there out of habit, out of fear of conflict, or because they made sense a long time ago and you never stopped to question them again. Here I want to share something I learned in a fairly painful way. No one is coming to rescue you from your own life. There's no miracle phone call, no special person, no perfect external circumstance that's going to solve, on your behalf, what only you can solve from the inside. This might sound lonely, even a bit hopeless if you hear it from the wrong angle, but it's actually exactly the opposite. It's the most liberating news there is, because if no one else has the power to change your story, then no one else has the power to stop it either. Full responsibility for your transformation rests entirely in your own hands. And even though that responsibility feels heavy at first, it also means you have complete control over the decisions that actually matter. I want to close with something that sums up the whole essence of this process. Every small decision you make every day, what time you get up, what you choose to feed your mind, the conversations you avoid or face, the habits you keep or drop, all of it, without exception, is writing chapter after chapter of the story you're currently living. There's no neutral pause in this process. Either you consciously pick up the pen and decide, with intention, what story you want to build, or you let routine, fear, and other people's expectations keep writing for you, chapter after chapter, until one day you find yourself asking how exactly you ended up where you are. So tonight, when you finish watching this video, you don't need to solve everything all at once. You just need to sit down alone, in silence, with a notebook in front of you, and honestly answer what you're doing wrong, what you need to let go of for good, and what small action you're going to take tomorrow. Don't wait for perfect motivation before starting, because that perfect motivation never arrives before the movement, it always arrives after. The decision to become the author of your own story doesn't depend on feeling ready. It depends, only, on deciding to pick up the pen tonight and start writing the next chapter with your own hands, instead of continuing to let others write it for you. If you made it this far, comment "I can," and I'll personally reply to you. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to be part of it, and give it a like if you enjoyed it.